gonna get any more people.
Oh, no, maybe there's somebody out there ringing a little bell. I hate that bell.
I hate
I like the bell.
No, I don't like the bell.
No, I don't
I
like
don't
it.
like the bell. Too mean. It makes me feel like a cow. Ding,
I
ding,
get the same feeling
ding.
like let's collect the herd.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just kind of like.
No problem.
Oh, there it is.
I understand why people do it.
Oh, the bell's ringing.
There's this whole plan they do where it's just kind of like, right, we'll hide the coffee between sessions so nobody can come out and like have a conversation.
That's the objective of the conference.
The objective of the conference, listen to me. You don't be talking to each other, just listen to me.
Okay, I think we should start the workshop. We are not that many here, but nevertheless, it's the last session of the day, so it's understandable. But we are also saving the best for last, I guess.
Great response, thank you very much.
So we are here today to discuss on the topic of sensitive data, so more specifically harmonized PID practices for protected data. My name is Josephine Nordling. I work at IT Center for Science in Finland, and I lead the work on persistent identifiers in the FAIR Impact project. Oh, nice, more people coming. Welcome. So this is the agenda for this short workshop we have. So we will start with a short introduction to the project, along with the specific work on PIDs that is being done. And then I will hand over to our use case partners, discussing first Renato Caminha Joacabaneto from EBI will be discussing the identifier.org protected data feature and the work that they are doing towards that particular service. Then we will have Hervé Lahors from CESDA UKDS, another PID use case of the project, discussing the sensitive data handling in the social sciences. So we have two quite different contexts, so one from the life sciences and the other from the social sciences. So this will be interesting to hear. And then we will dedicate quite a lot of time for discussions, so I hope that you're still up for the task, so really invigorating and enough awake for having a sort of a free discussion towards the end. We will be using Mentimeter, but we can also focus more on speaking up freely. So this is the agenda. Firstly, a few words about the project. So this is a Horizon Infra project that started in June last year, and it will be running for 36 months. So we are roughly halfway into the project currently. We have 28 partners and affiliated entities working in this project. And this project has a mission on enabling discovery and interoperability of federated research objects across scientific communities. So a lot of the work that we do is that we're trying to sort of translate what we learn from one scientific discipline into another one. So here you can see the project design. We have 7 work packages in total. We have 3 so-called pillar work packages, of which one is persistent identifiers. Then we have one on metadata and on ontologies, and on metrics, certifications, and guidelines. We have 2 cross-cutting work packages, one on interoperability and the other one on engagement, adoption, and implementation. So first off, here are the tasks on PIDs. We have data site in lead of setting up a coordination mechanism for EOSC PID service providers. Then we have CSC in charge of... Oh, sorry, there is some screen here, so I can't really see anything. But should it be here?
Yes. accessibility structure.
Voice guide. Thank you. Another task on integration of PID practices into FAIR data management. Then we have a task focusing on EOSC PID policy alignment and support led by Dans. And lastly, we have SURF leading the task on PID implementation program. So first off, we have a task coordinating with PID service providers. We have already established sort of a recommendation on how to set up joint value proposition by relevant PID service providers. So the first piece of work was done a year ago here at the EOSC Symposium in Prague. And then next in line is to set up sort of guidelines for PID service providers coordination mechanism. So this piece of work, first off, identifies the needs to set up a coordination mechanism, but also sort of the requirements needed for efficient coordination. It also outlines the stakeholders that are to be involved in such a coordination mechanism. And lastly, it aims to align PID service providers with the EOSC. And towards the end, there is also a task on aligning requirements for onboarding PID providers into EOSC, but also to delineate the emergent PIDs. So this particular piece of work is done together with 8 integrated use case partners, so of which 2 are here today with us. The basic task is to identify and document best practices for PID implementation. For example, managing workflows, datasets, and research objects. The user needs, the main target group is the end users, so that is to keep in mind that we need to focus on the PID users in the end. And as I mentioned before, so we are very keen on sort of translating the scientific needs from one, the PID practices from one scientific community to another. And while doing so, we are interacting with communities through workshops, so this is one way of interacting with other stakeholders and communities. So the use cases are divided into 3 subtasks. So the one that we are discussing here today is obviously the one on PIDs and sensitive data. In addition to that, we also work on PIDs in data production workflows and PIDs in complex data citation. And all of these 3 use cases, they also work on some cross-cutting themes, which you can see here on the picture below. So on, for example, reproducibility, research object type definitions, granularity, versioning, etc. So this was some nice animations I didn't remember having, but okay. So here you can see on the left-hand side all the services and platforms and tools that are used within these, combined with all of these use case partners. And on the right-hand side, you can see all the projects and the initiatives that the use cases are able to work together with and exploit synergies with. So this task is looking into different PID policies within the EOSC, mapping and analyzing these policies, and towards the end, we'll provide recommendations made for different stakeholder groups. This task will also produce a set of guidelines for creating EOSC-compliant PID policies. There will be, most likely towards the end of this year, a virtual workshop, mostly focusing on the target group data managers, but more about this. This workshop is to come soon, so stay tuned for that. And then lastly, we have the PID implementation program with the main task to provide support for the open call applicants of the project. We also have here a workshop coming up in late November. It is under the November RDA theme, titled EOSC Compliant PID Implementations, Practical Guidelines for Implementing Best Practices. So this will be a really concrete workshop where the workshop participants are able to sort of think of their own perspective and apply what they learned through this workshop into their own work and domains. And this task will deliver a technical EOSC PID implementation guide. So that was all I had to present from the project side, but do we have any questions before we go to the first of two use case partners? We can also take more of the questions towards the end when we have the discussion part. So I think we can move on to your presentation. So next we have Renato explaining about identifiers.org.
Thank you. So yes, my name is Renato from EmbleDBI, and I'm just here to introduce this new feature that we recently added to the service for protected data collections, or at least online resources which are under protection. So for those that don't really know identifiers.org yet, so we offer two main services. The first one is a registry with metadata on several collections. Historically, it has been mostly biology-related collections, but we have added recently data collections from other domains. And this includes what we, at the time, decided as minimum metadata, such as descriptions, names, and other online locations. And we have the resolver, which uses the information on the registry to find valid online locations for entries on the collections for that data set. This is just the metadata, so we don't store individual entries. We just have metadata on the different collections. This is maintained and hosted by EmbleDBI, which is considered one of the world-leading sources of public biomolecular data, and as part of the European Molecular Biology Laboratory. And so I hope that with that, we have a little bit of credibility to the service that is being hosted by a credible institution. And this institution takes care of the creation of the registry. So we try to maintain the data on the registry always updated to the best of our capabilities, but we do depend on the community to help us keep this. So our global PIDs are based on the prefix, which is an identifier for each collection, and the local ID of an entry in a collection. So we form compact identifiers based on this prefix and this local ID. This has been defined in a previous paper, in several previous papers. So this is the schema that we have. So each entry can be identified globally in our registry using the prefix and its local ID in that collection. And our resolver is able to find online locations for that, for each entry in a location. So you can either use our API to collect all the possible locations of an entry in a collection, or you can use what most people use as our URLs, which basically are the identifiers.org/compact identifier, which that's going to redirect you to a valid location for an entry in a collection. So the problem arises from the fact that some of the collections are not openly available. So if you have been here for the previous session, you heard enough about that. But so from that, we consider that there is going to be an authentication barrier in front of that collection. And following, and that authentication is going to decide what's your level of access and your constraint to access that, or your identification to that access. So this is what we are assuming that it's going to happen for each collection. And the use cases that we have for that is that either the data is sensitive or it's very costly to access the data. So the first case, it's because, for example, if it contains the data of users, and in the other cases, maybe the data is hosted on a cloud that charges the provider for that. So we added this new feature that it's the protected identifiers. And we try to do this the most lightweight as possible, following the idea of identifiers to be as lightweight as possible, and to include as many as any area that we can. And for that, we just added two entries in two attributes on the metadata. One is a high-level description. So we imagine there is a little paragraph that each provider is going to have with the information on how to gain access and why you need to gain access before accessing the data, and a URL that is going to contain more information on that. So we assume that this is going to be enough for now. And in the case that a collection is available either with or without protection, then this is also available via the multiple providers of the same collection that we are already supporting on identifiers.org. We optionally have a landing page, because now all providers are going to have a nice landing page explaining how to access the data. So we added a landing page. Here's an example. So normally when you access a resource which is protected, you're going to have like an authorized page, for example, such as this one, which is not nice because you don't have any information. You don't know if the data is actually there or not. So we optionally have this landing page. So these are the two main changes to identifiers. This is just an initial step. We know that this is not enough. This is not very machine actionable. We don't want you to ask ChatGPT to get the information from the description. So this is the initial step. We are still waiting for the community to have nice proposals for that, and we are going to evolve as time goes. And this is the point that I give the points to Hervé, which is going to go into a much more complex way to handle this.
Thanks, Ben. Cheers. Okay, I now hold the clicker of power. Let's see how this goes. So, hi everyone. We'll try and knock through this and make sure everyone gets to go home one more PowerPoint closer to exit. I'm Hervé Laws. We're doing this through this CESDA, which is the Consortium of European Social Science Data Archives. The UK representative for that is the UK Data Service, which is a multi-university partnership in the UK. And I'm from the UK Data Archive, and we've been sticking around looking after data since about 1967. The context of all this is primarily data about humans in the social sciences. We provide access through secure remote access and access via a safe room. You'll have heard more about the trusted research environments if you were here for the previous session. This is a slightly different angle on some of this. We're maybe slightly unusual because we're holding both a file-driven environment and an evolving RDF linked data system as well. So we're trying to think about this metadata problem from both sides. We hold ISO 27001 for information security. We've had that certification since sort of 2012, so obviously there's a big standards compliance issue to be faced there. And we also comply with the UK Digital Economy Act, which is their instantiation of GDPR. And obviously all the work that you see here is within the context of the EOSC PID policy and this evolving expectations of what needs to be in PID kernel metadata, that kind of what's at the heart of that metadata. We're working through the different digital object models, how the data and metadata might be set up by different things, looking at the kernel metadata, and also the rights management for the different objects that you generate during the course of the process. So we're looking at the data, sensitive data and the non-sensitive data classifications and the divisions. And the key points here, obviously, stuff arrives at deposit with one or other form of sensitivity assessment. During the initial curation and the active preservation phases, the sensitivity might change. And then we're looking at the objects when we're handling synthetic data, subsetting of data, and then checking of outputs from the system. So this is a fairly basic lifecycle perspective. Now, from the PID kernel perspective, we need to worry about the identifiers and the associated metadata at the point of access by an end user. We know that there are multiple other versioning, object changes, and copy actions that happen within the repository, and that these are probably more appropriate for the provenance metadata. The difference from a traditional model that you might see for a lot of repositories is we're now mediating the reuse of the data. It's not just access data and then move on. And one of the other key things that we need to decide during each of these stages is, as we appraise and reappraise the data over time, what will be retained and for how long? What will be curated up to a certain standard, either, it could be an evaluation of fairness, and what will be preserved for the long term, with the obvious impact on reproducibility and availability. Now, as I said, we're mainly focusing on personal data. We're also looking at where the specifications we put together overlap with commercial, environmentally sensitive, or culturally sensitive data, and how you handle the different classifications across data and the metadata as well. Obviously, the kernel metadata needs to be clean for sensitivity purposes. And also where the assertions of the sensitivity comes from. We know that there are cases where the data owners might prescribe the rights over their data quite strongly. That's kind of a self-declaration of sensitivity, really. And we differentiate between that and whether it's down to the intrinsic properties of the actual underlying data, with obviously the end goal of being able to do a empirical runtime analysis to actually kind of work out what the sensitivity levels are based on the re-identification risk of the data. And these evaluations follow a fairly sort of standard model, which we've got to instantiate in the workflows somehow. An entity, whatever the digital object might be, has attributes, and we use an assessment process to compare the evidence about those attributes to standards requirements, to give some sort of sensitivity status in the end. But the picture inevitably gets a bit more complicated. What are the governance policies behind those different evaluations? How do they change over time? Some of that might be programmatic and algorithmic. Some of it might be much more to do with the public appetite for the sharing of data over time. Both of those have got to be taken into account. And down at the bottom there, you'll see the difference between the human actors and the machine agents. And part of this is how far we can go towards being machine actionable. This horror story instantiates the various policies and license criteria around sort of assigning duties, giving permissions, and prohibiting certain actions around a digital object, which is obviously the key process towards making some of this machine actionable. This terminology is from the Open Digital Rights language. And then we've got a number of considerations when we're handling this in the workflows and how we're going to present this at the other end. Part of it's pure metadata, part of it's about the user experience. We know that we can't set an absolutely standard version copy model across the board, but one of the questions we've got is how we best expose those so different organizations and entities can interact with the data. We've got multiple serializations of the data, which might be otherwise identical. We've got the handling of HTML landing pages and catalog records. These all have got an impact on the machine actionability and how we identify whether an object is, how the object model is handled overall. We've got the granularity and version management. There's a lot of work around the fact that statistical data that doesn't go down to variable level with variable identifiers, or question and survey data down to that level, is fundamentally less valuable and fundamentally harder to work with machine actually. And all of this has got to be brought into this idea of what we specify for the PID syntax and semantics. And there's the RDA PID kernel recommendation, but also there's some active work on this on the FAIR core for EOSC who've come in and interacted with FAIR impact on this. If you were in the previous session, you would have seen a lot about the 5 SACE framework in terms of workflows. Obviously, from our perspective, this is more about the implications for metadata. There is not just one object here. It's not just the data. You've got the conceptual project, the people involved and the level of training they've received and how they're identified, the settings, the safe environments that they're in, and the outputs. And output checking either manually or somewhat automatically is one of the key automation challenges. So what are our expected outcomes and our added value? Well, we're looking to go for practical guidance on optimal PID usage, both for access and the management. Yeah? This is not very machine actionable at the moment. Wim Hugo from Dance was presenting on something earlier, which starts to cover how you might extend a CC license with more constraints. Better aligned and documented practices. We can't force alignment, but we can document our practices so they're comparable, so we can address more cases. Consistent handling of sensitive data within and between secure environments, ideally transnationally as well, which is obviously the huge challenge. And finally, from the social science archives point of view, this is about delivering societal and economic impact. Yeah? So it's about leveraging this stuff so that we can do that more effectively. And that's all from me. Have control.
Is this on? Yes. So do we have any questions for either Renato or Hervé before we move over to the Mentimeter? Yes?
There is many questions.
Many questions.
Yes, because it's on, how I say, very general level. And maybe first about this identifiers.org. What you use handle system, or you have your own system for persistent identifiers, and what kernel metadata you have for different type of these digital objects?
So for each collection, we have metadata. So it has descriptions, it have the owner, it has several attributes for that. So for each location, for each collection. In a collection, you're going to have the several entries, and for each entry, we don't have any information. We know that for one collection, the IDs of the entries, they follow a pattern. And we know for each collection how to rewrite a URL pattern to link to an entry, a specific entry in that collection. But that's all we have. And we did this way because we want identifiers to be as lightweight as possible, to make it last as much as possible, so that in case, so that it makes it easier for people to use it, basically.
So for resolving, you need first identifier.org, and then you need to add type of objects and ID of an object
yes.
for resolving.
So for example, you can, if you have an ascension number for a GNA or something, you're going to have a collection for that, and you can just put the prefix of that collection, which is the unique identifier of that collection, and then 2 dots for the format of the compact identifiers, and then the ascension number.
And what is with collections which is deleted from the database? You have a process when a deletion of collection is done. For example, you have a collection of protein information, and then you delete this collection from the repository.
We never delete an entry from the registry. We just mark it as deactivated, which is basically deprecated. So that entry now is marked on the registry, and if someone accesses the page of that collection, is going to see that it's deprecated and they should use another one. And we recently added more information to that, so the reason why it was deactivated and things like this.
And who is responsible? You have, I suppose, an API. Someone sent you metadata and you put this metadata into database and give ID, I think. This is a process in your...
Yes, so curation is done manually. So we have our team of curators that if there is a wrong entry in the registry, we either detect ourselves or we get information.
So you
contact
haven't
from the community.
API for...
Yes, we also have an API.
but manually you see if it's good or not. It is not possible to do automatically to see if on the location is this, how I say, digital object.
We have minimal validations. So for example, when someone asks a new, makes a request for a new collection, the form itself checks if there is a HTTP backend there to answer the request for the URL of that collection. But everything is curated by our team, so there is always a person there that checks everything.
For Hervé, I have one question about this granularity of PIDs on the level of version, level of file, I think level of column in the file, for example, in one variable, how you solve these things for every data set is done automatically or?
It depends on the level of structure of the underlying data. So within the linked data environment, it's getting easier and easier to kind of like assign GUID so that you can just extend from a kind of a baseline DOI and provide, I mean, what you're looking for is you're looking for maximum granularity without prohibitive cost.
So you give DOIs to every digital object or
so
every
we assign
version.
DOIs at study level.
This is expensive, I think. A little bit is maybe better to have your own, for example, PID server for a resolution. If you have a lot of digital objects, it is very expensive.
If you're prepared to meet what will be the requirements for delivering an entirely sustainable PID solution, then you can do that as well. So we use DataSite. We've got a relationship with the DataSite provider in the UK, which is the British Library. But yeah, once you get down to that lower level of granularity, it does get prohibitively expensive, and registering at that level is not necessarily the solution to what you're doing. So you're looking for something which works harmoniously with kind of a parent PID, but machine actionably allows you to identify subparts of an object. Obviously, this only comes up at the point that you publish the object, though, as well, because obviously we've got like kind of secure research environments where people are subsetting from multiple different data sets, performing linkages between those data sets in the safe environment. That's all happening before an output is approved. So within that system, you can manage very granular, uniquely identified items for linkage. But until the product leaves the building, you're not actually talking about assigning a DOI, for instance.
And how you resolve problems with, for example, if you have some column in a data set which is sensible and you don't show this DOI, because someone have possibilities to, I don't know how you have a namespace for these identifiers, but if you have only increment, then it's possible to find data object.
Yeah, I mean, having measures in there to make sure that the next increment's non-guessable is pretty critical to the whole thing. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for these questions. So I think we can go over to the Mentimeter questions then.
Very noisy microphone.
Oh yeah, we have already a bunch of answers to this first question. It wasn't a really easy one necessarily, but good that you dare to answer this question in any case. I mean, there are probably no wrong answers here, so I'll encourage as many of you to answer this question. So the first one was, what triggers generating a new PID? So a very large open-ended question at this point. So we have many good inputs. So what was it? Not reproducibility. Changes, obviously, if they are even a bit larger, new versions of a data set. The data has changed. An existing collection data set is digitalized. Can we get the results? Okay, so the next question, I wanted to see further up, but we can take this one instead because this provides some optional answers to this very same question. You are allowed to choose multiple of these alternatives. So let's see what happens here. Version control, where there is a timestamp in place. Correction of errors, metadata correction, but we only have very little input so far, so let's see if this changes. So I can see that the first three get the most support so far, especially version control, which also came through in the from the open-ended question as well. Okay, so we can take the next question now, please. So that is, what is the main challenge when managing PIDs for protected data? And this is in the form of a word cloud, so 1 to 2 words, but you're allowed to put in multiple entries. Maybe this is a tricky question or requires some consideration. Yeah, so unsurprisingly, we have input on authentication, authorization, the shareability, obviously, of the protected data. Lots of different words, which is nice and which also reflects on the challenges, the multiple challenges involved. Granularity, yeah, we have also some questions for you on that topic. But I think we can take the next question. This might be a tricky one, but let's see. It's also a broad one, so you can answer pretty much anything related to the data types. What are your own, if you have any, sensitive data types? This can be in the form of disciplines, sensitivity levels, or stakeholders. Yeah, health, sciences. So it's good to see also some other scientific disciplines that we normally see in this context. So also within environmental sciences, archaeology. Yeah, research on people, I guess, citizens, personal data, yeah, related. Patient data. Yeah, and then of course data that can describe or identify people and their locations, and census data. Can anyone explain to me what that is? I haven't heard about that. Census? No.
Yeah, it's like when the government asks asks questions about all the citizens, like how many people are in your household, what are their ages, what's your background.
Okay, thanks for the clarification there.
Usually every 10 years or so.
Okay.
If you want, you can complement. It's fine.
No, it's a government-driven database or on all the people in the country. And now in Spain, it was done every 10 years, and now they are starting some parts of it will be done every year. So it's quite recent information always.
Okay. Then we have interview data as well. I think we have some good amount of replies, so we can take the next question, please. This is an interesting one. What type of information should be part of the kernel information? So whether it be technical metadata, which is sort of information about data storage or data formats or data processing, or descriptive metadata, enabling discoverability, information about access rights, or information about sensitivity levels. And currently, I would say there is no real consensus just yet of what this should be. So it's always interesting to get feedback.
About access of digital object, I don't know. What's the kernel metadata you need? Also, where is digital object? There is no.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Sorry, you're asking this or?
No, this is the main thing in kernel metadata is that you need to have URL or something like this to access a digital object.
But I guess this is assuming that you can access the kernel metadata somewhere and the actual object is in another one.
Yes, but in kernel metadata you have also link to where you find digital object.
Yeah, but
Yes.
I guess that's the technical metadata
This is not technical.
or yeah.
Okay, I think we can take the next question. What is important to consider in sensitivity assessment? I think this was also in the form of a word cloud, if I'm not mistaken. Was it? Yes. The law. Lots of good input. I really like the word clouds. You can use them in outreach also at a later point in time. Really good points here. community stakeholders. That's interesting. Anyone wants to open up their thought on that one?
Yeah, I was the one who contributed that, and I'm coming at it from a cultural heritage perspective. So when we think about sensitivity, we think about the people who are represented, but also the people who maybe have an ownership stake because they've been represented. So it's just a little bit different from privacy, and it's more thinking about the impact on communities of the use of their data.
Okay, thank you for opening up that. Makes sense, yes. Yes, that is a good one. What to consider, damage done if it is leaked. So very good point. Ethical codes, that comes across a few times. And the impact on persons, the impact on company. Yes, very good. So maybe we can take the next question. How important are the following elements when managing granularity? So there are lots of choices there. So it's on a scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And many might apply very well. Yes, as has been discussed already in the previous questions, the legal and ethical considerations are obviously quite important here to consider. And of course also enabling machine actionability. Yeah, so practical user needs and community-defined policies are somewhat maybe towards the same line, so they get almost the same amount of votes as well, which is understandable. Data type-based definitions of granularity is also voted for quite much. But I'm sure that all of these applies to a certain degree, but it's good to hear from you how you sort of would place these statements. I think we can take the next question if we have one. What type of information should go into the kernel metadata? So this is partially the same question as before, but this is if you would have some practical examples to provide us. Would be nice to hear. Yes, access, information, data provenance is important. Data production metadata. Original use case. What would we mean by that?
For what purpose was that created?
Okay, yeah, of course. And provenance again? Sorry? Yeah, license, yeah. Yeah, that's good. Quality information. That's also, yeah, how do you define quality?
How you will achieve with this kernel metadata
That's a really good question. Maybe someone can have some assumptions. Hervé, do you have an answer to that, or?
Machine actionability and how you achieve it. Standards, adoption, physical coercion, I'm not sure. I mean, as we saw earlier on, this is always an emergence from what kind of information should we be sharing. As we saw from the identifiers.org, let's start sharing that information, and then over time, how can you structure that information more efficiently so that it can be standardized? The more standardized the metadata becomes, the more ubiquitous it becomes, the more it's possible to promote to people they should be developing systems that can interoperate with it. It's pretty much the same challenge we're seeing in almost every area of EOSC, which is, you know, the balance of the effort of creating and developing the standards and creating the metadata has got to be balanced out by some kind of benefit at the other end to having made that investment.
Maybe one problem is which operation is possible to do in problem is about operations because in sensitive data is not possible to do everything.
Yeah, so that becomes, yeah, it depends what level you're looking at the information. You start off with the rights information, yeah, so you might control what the permissions and the prohibitions and the obligations are in the rights information. For me, if I need to get some data relatively quickly, and I've got a deadline for what I'm doing, or I know that my use case doesn't require personally identifiable information, just the very basic fact of saying the binary, this is or isn't sensitive data during a search, can be useful in itself. Yeah, because I might only be interested in stuff where I don't need to go and get training or go to a safe room or something.
Problem is that, for example, this open digital rights language is not enough for know what is possible to do in machine actionability. This is my point of view, but I don't know what others means.
Yeah, ODRL provides, something like ODRL provides you a framework for controlling certain actions, but yeah, we absolutely need to specify what that implies in our particular data types in our particular fields, yeah.
Okay, I think this might have been the last question, I'm not sure. Yes, that was it. Thank you very much for this discussion. This is really valuable input to the use case documentation work, so we really appreciate you participating in this discussion. That was all for us, and thank you very much for joining.
Right on time.
Time even a bit before, I think we had until 5 past. But yeah, we started late, so. Yeah, I know.